Thank you. The type of educator I am, I have a lot of show and tell. So before that, let me put this here, otherwise I'll forget to mention it. I want to first acknowledge the stolen land that we're on right now. So I know the white colonizers want us to think that we're in Austin at the moment, and actually we are on Tonkawa and Comanche land. And the reason that I wanted to do this and show off, yes, I know that you already checked out the shirt. I love the shirt. I happen to be queer and Latinx, is especially because indigenous communities have taught us that there are no illegal people on stolen land. And I want to just take a moment, if you could join me in honoring that. Because ACC, Austin, is pretty near the border. And I think it's important that we remember that piece. So I'm Natalia, in case you haven't guessed so far. I am a cis queer Latina. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and CEO of Pipeline Angels, and we are working to literally change the face of angel investing, as well as create more capital for women and non-binary femme social entrepreneurs. And throughout this journey, getting those numbers up in terms of the women and femmes that are getting funded by actually creating more of what I like to call sharks. How many of you are familiar with the show Shark Tank? Okay, so I like to call our members Sharks in Training, because for many of them, this is the first time that they're making an angel investment. Here's the deal. Think back to how many seasons of Shark Tank there have been. I want to say 7, it might be 11, I don't know, it's like so many seasons. Have you ever noticed a woman of color or femme of color shark on the show? So oftentimes diversity means white women and men of color. And oftentimes we're leaving a huge gap that is not being considered. And that was really what the goal of Pipeline Angels was. And especially you might have noticed that one of our members mentioned friends and family. A lot of entrepreneurs don't have the friends and family around to then be able to secure that funding to get to the next stage. So I have, how many of you have been using Slido? Okay, so I would love for you to use Slido right now and tell me one inclusive best practice that you found on the video. And the reason that we're using Slido is because genius doesn't just come in extrovert size, and there are some people, that's me, that love to get on the mic and ask a question, and there's some people that maybe prefer to ask it in a different way. And so my thought was that I could do this keynote, and throughout the keynote showcase best practices in terms of how can we be more inclusive in the classroom, in a conference room, and just in a workspace. And I'm wondering, has anyone inputted anything? Because I'm not finding anything on the Slido.com, so this is where also technology working to help us make inclusive spaces is important. Yes, okay. Someone said captioning. Yes, captioning is one of the inclusive best practices that we did on the video. How many of you are familiar with open versus closed captioning? So open captioning is exactly what we did on the video, which means that it just stays on. There's no way to get it off. And some of the pros are that it's always there. Closed captioning is when you're able to decide whether to take it off and take it on. I was trying to read what are really some advantages of doing closed captioning, and the main one, oh, okay. How are we doing? How are we doing for the hearing people in the room? Although some deaf and hard of hearing might have felt the shock. Okay, are we okay? Okay, good. We'll find out later what that is. And if it's really important, they'll come to us, right? So the closed captioning, one of the things that I read was that you can actually edit closed captions. For us, we chose to go on the side of open captioning because it's always there. It's always accessible. Let me find out if there was one more. Is there anything else that, yes. So the language, someone mentioned the language that we have. So we use women and non-binary femmes because we are working with anyone identifying with womanhood. And here's where I get to do my cis PSA. Not everyone identifying with womanhood identifies as a woman. And so we want to make sure that we're creating broader inclusive language practices that welcome and encourage more of us to come into, pun intended, the pipeline. The other thing that you might not have, that I was hoping someone would notice was, and this is exactly why we have an ASL interpreter, is we are centering deafness. And the reason I think it's important that we talk about that is an experience that one of my colleagues, Anissa Flowers, Chief of Staff at Pipeline Angels. Anissa is deaf, Black, Native, queer. Anissa's the team member who helped us and guided us in terms of starting off by acknowledging the stolen land that we're on as a practice. And so now that's part of the system at Pipeline Angels. And I got some tickets to rent. You know, there's this whole conversation about recruitment. Retention is important, right? So it's like, how can I retain awesome talent? Let's give them tickets to rent. And they went to rent at Pope Joy Hall, which is on Pueblo's land, also known as Albuquerque. And I wanted to get the best seats in the house. And I was told they were literally the best seats in the house because they were literally in front of the ASL interpreter. The issue, though, was that the ASL interpreter was not on stage. They were at the side because some hearing people had complained that ASL interpreters are distracting. And so I wanted to have this moment, number one, to share like how distracting it really is it for hearing people to have an ASL interpreter in the same frame as the speaker. And at the same time, just imagine someone who needs that ASL interpreter to better understand what's happening, because a lot of us hearing people actually don't know ASL. That's the real reason that we need an ASL interpreter, because so many of us don't know ASL. You know what I think is distracting? Checking out the ASL interpreter, going back to stage. Checking out the ASL interpreter, going back to stage. Who agrees with me? Yeah? So these are little things that we can do that come from best mistakes. I'm not sure if I would have, I remembered to ask South by Southwest EDU for an ASL interpreter. I'm not sure I would have really remembered to share, let's make sure we're on the same frame. Had that fail. So someone else's inclusion fail can be a best mistake, someone else's best mistake can be a best practice for you. So now, I wanted to start off with that because I think it's an important way that we can frame this conversation of what best mistakes can create. And I wanted to also share, I'd say like that first ever best mistake that happened, that was what coined for me that concept of best mistake. I want to say a couple years ago, we had just hired Anissa and we had our first ever team dinner. And what happened was that we have been a remote team by that point, and this was the first time that we were all in the same place. I managed to find a woman-owned restaurant. I managed to find a Black woman ASL interpreter. This is how I actually found out that the majority of ASL interpreters are white women. And I was like, check. This is like such an inclusive team dinner. And then after the dinner, I checked in with Anissa and I was like, well, I'm like so excited. Like, what did you think? And she says, Natalia, that wasn't a deaf-friendly restaurant. The lighting was dim. The table wasn't round, which actually helps with communication. And I was like so crestfallen. I'm like, you just like, you hope. You're like, I'm getting it right. And then as it so happens, a few weeks later, I was interviewing Ellen Powell. How many of you know Ellen Powell? Ellen is a venture capitalist who in 2012 sued Kleiner Perkins, a venture fund, due to sexual harassment. And so she's part of Tarana Burke's #MeToo movement. And I was interviewing her for her book, Reset, which, by the way, check it out if you haven't. And I was telling her, let me tell you my best mistake. I'm here like about to share, and this is what Ellen told me. Natalia, Anissa told you. Anissa told you that it wasn't a deaf-friendly restaurant. You've created a culture at Pipeline Angels where Anissa felt comfortable telling you the truth. And now, I'm sure that you will think about this the next time that you plan an event. That it'll be brighter lighting, that'll help the lip reading, that'll help with being able to capture ASL interpreting. And that ideally there will be round tables, or at least tables that make it easier to have better peripheral vision. And that's when I was like, aha, that's the moment that I'm coining the term best mistakes happen. Because as Maya Angelou says, now that I know better, I do better. And that's really what this talk is about. It's not just like, we're gonna make mistakes. I actually just realized that we have another mistake. We have an inclusion fail on that video. How many of you noticed that inclusion fail? No? Okay, great, Saved by the Bell. I'll tell you, because this is how we can get better together, by sharing those fails. That video has a slide, which I'm actually going to read in a second, that works very well if you're checking it on YouTube, because in the description, what that slide says is in the description. So just imagine, for anyone who's blind or hard of seeing, would they have been able to capture what that slide said right now? No, right? So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I hope you'll humor me in my just voicing what that slide said. And given that we have this opportunity, what we're going to do moving forward is actually we're going to have someone voice that slide whenever we use that video in the future. So what that slide said, so to make sure that we're trying to make sure everyone's on the same page, this summer, with the help of local organizations, including Grupo Guayacán, Parallel 18, Santurce Pop, and Animus, Pipeline Angels launched its signature angel investing boot camp in San Juan, Puerto Rico, to support the island's founders and economy while working to double the number of Latinx angel investors nationwide. A 2017 Wharton and Angel Capital Association study found that only 2.3% of US angel investors are Latinx. So I'm doing this because it's just an example that we can make a mistake, but we can correct it. And it's just that we want to make sure that we have that effort to do that. I want to check in with each of you because I have a few other sorts of best mistakes to share with you. Feel free to, through Slido, if you have a question or if you have a, inclusion fail that you'd like to share with the room, and we can workshop what that next step could be. I'd love to do that. The best mistake that I want to share with you is we have these pitch summits. They're half-a-day events where we have 5-minute pitches for the entrepreneurs, and then we have 10-minute Q&A. And then what has happened in the past is that we've told the entrepreneurs, make sure that you connect with each and every angel investor in the room. And this is what often happens during lunch. There are a few people who make sure to get everyone's business card. And there's several people, entrepreneurs, who are just eating their lunch quietly. They're not actually interacting. And I'm going to get provocative. Are you ready? I'm going to say 2 big words. So the lean-in method would say that we should tell those entrepreneurs who are sitting there, eating their lunch, you need to lean in. You need to get everyone's business card. But here's the question for you. If the outcome that we want is that each of these founders connects with each member, why aren't we creating a process or a system that helps them meet each member before they leave that day? So what I'm saying is we have been talking so much about individuals leaning in. How can we get systems to lean in? And so this is one of the things that I want each of you to kind of leave today with, which is What system do you have any sort of agency, responsibility, or influence in at work, at home, in your social life, that you could actually be helping to make it more inclusive? And so what we've done since then is, and this is as a reminder, because genius doesn't just come in extrovert size, is that during lunch, we facilitate 5-minute one-on-ones between each founder and the members. And so guess what? Since we started instituting that system, have we gotten the outcome that we were hoping for? Yes, finally, each entrepreneur has met with the members. And that's really where I'd love for you, if anything you want to take from this talk, is like that systems perspective. Why does it have to be the burden of an individual to lean in to force the system to be more inclusive? Finally, there's someone who, Sarah Doe, thank you for adding your question. So how do you convince people to join the mission who completely disagree with you? Or similarly, what if they just don't know or fail to accept the truths? So I want to go back to that part about who completely disagree with you. About a year and a half ago, I was speaking at a conference, and PopTech, are you familiar with PopTech? Yes. I spilled the beans. I said who it was. And it's one of those multi-day conferences, and then the curator at the time announced that there was going to be a drunk talk. Surprise! Surprise, we're going to have a drunk talk. And around that time was when we had the whole Tarana Burke's Me Too movement had kind of gained speed. People were saying, hey, this is no longer the way that we can do things. And there were all these stats about how women and femmes feel unsafe in the workplace when there's alcohol present. I told the board, I told presidents, I told the curator, and nothing happened. And I felt angry because I did all the right things. When something is going wrong, what are we told to do? Speak up, sign, right? And nothing happened. And so a couple of months later, I was at another conference called DazzleCon in Portland, and someone approached me, and I was like, you really enjoyed your talk at PopTech, and then really enjoyed your talk right now, and then beat. Can you imagine that they had a drunk talk? So a couple of months later, people were still thinking about that drunk talk, and I realized that even though I was not able to change that conference, prevent that from happening, I could change what we do at Pipeline Angels. And so we announced an alcohol-free policy around the holidays, because that's actually when a lot of holiday parties happen, right? And a lot of people are getting together and networking, and of course, alcohol is a big piece of it. And the reason that we had that alcohol-free policy is not because we had an issue. It's because we wanted to model a different way of doing business, a different way of a culture that we could have. And we got tons of tweets and emails, several people sharing with us that they had been sober for like several decades, and that they finally felt safe to go to a business networking event. So this is another time that I'm going to encourage you to think about, is that something that you could implement wherever you are? And this is the part that resonates so much for me, and it goes back to the who completely disagree with you, because I'm just so used to talking about the ones that it's like, you know what? Sometimes you just need to have, sometimes the narrower your focus, the more that you can actually find the people that really get your mission. And so instead of kind of spreading yourself out, thinking about how can I make myself be interesting for everyone, think about how can you really focus your message so you're actually finding the right people. And so fast forward to a couple of months ago, we got someone who applied, who shared in her application that she's sober, and that a few years ago she had read about Pipeline Angels, thought about applying, and might have found out that we were hosting or going to be at a cocktail party. And as soon as she read that we were either hosting or going to be a cocktail party, she hashtag unsubscribed. And then when she found us again and she found our alcohol-free policy on our website, she was like, these are my people, they get me. And so sometimes the disagreement is not just who disagrees with you, it's also how can you grow in your culture to then maybe find those stronger alliances with others. Another question. How do you increase diversity within a company or org without it looking or feeling like tokenism? Oh my gosh, you really want me to be provocative. Wow. So on the side of women, non-binary people, and men of color, who often were the ones who feel like we're the quota or that we're the tokens, I often say, think about the rooms that we have not been invited in just because we're a woman, non-binary person, or a man of color. And so I'm like, seize the day, be tokenized. You're actually getting invited into the room. Because there's a lot of that ambivalence for a lot of us. You know, we're like, do we really belong in this room? There's so many rooms that we're still not being invited to that's how I focus on that part. For like a more general conversation in terms of just how to talk about it, I often found it curious that we talk about how we want to increase diversity in the pipeline, and a lot of people want to talk about how let's make sure that we don't lower the barrier, you know, like lower our standards. I think that's a big one, right? Here's the deal. By actually getting more people in the room, we're raising the bar. Think about it, right? Because who's already in the room? We're not talking about what sort of bar there is for the people who are already in the room. We're just talking about how the bar is going to change when we get more people. Well, in effect, by getting more people, we're actually getting closer to a more meritocratic system because there's going to be more people that are going to be considered versus that narrow piece that that's already in the pipeline. Okay, these are going fast, finally. Wait a second. I'm like trying to find if I can compile them into one. Awesome. So there's a question that actually goes to a really important piece, which is like explain terms. So it says, for those in the room who do not understand cisgender and or queer femme, please enlighten so we have clarity and acceptance. So then the easy one is cis and trans. So cis are people who are in trans. It gets very complex. The easiest way that people talk about it is like the gender that you present as is the same as the gender you are. And then non-binary are people who are outside of that woman-man spectrum. So the reason that we talk about anyone identifying with womanhood is because not everyone who identifies with womanhood identifies as a woman. And you might often, like, some of those terms that personally are not being used in the proper way are like women and female identifying people. I was like, that means women, right? A lot of people, what they want to say is like women and femmes, but they don't have that language. The other one that like really is frustrating and I encourage you not to use is women and people of color. My issue with women and people of color is that what people often mean is white women and people of color. They just don't say white. And so us women of color that are in both, we're twice there, however doubly erased. So you might have noticed that I've said women, non-binary people, and men of color. That's my current favorite way of, you know, if we're gonna, instead of using, if you're not gonna use folks, that's kind of like my way of making sure that we're highlighting and amplifying each community without kind of erasing each other. And then the one thing that I will say is that there was a tweet, and please remind me, you have like my Twitter handle, please nakis. If I forget to do this, send me a tweet and I'll send it out. There was this really powerful tweet from a trans person who said that they actually had been born in the right body. And it gave me chills as a cis person to read that tweet because a lot of the rhetoric that is often talked about is that a lot of trans people rhetoric is they were born in the wrong body. And it was the first time, you know, think about it, like someone saying, actually, I was born in the right body. And it's a trans body. Taking a moment because it's kind of heavy duty, right? It's reclaiming something and reclaiming it to talk about something that's right. versus like society has often told us that is wrong. So please remind me, and I'll try to find that tweet and send it out. How do you recover emotionally, spiritually from mistakes when it reveals truths that are inconsistent with how we view ourselves? That's actually why I coined this term best mistakes, because, and I'm going to say it again because Maya Angelou is just so amazing. Now that I know better, I do better. Just this past weekend, we had our orientation for the Spring 2019 programs, and I found out, and by the way, I hope you're enjoying the shade of lipstick I'm wearing, because I found out this past weekend that bright lipstick is hard for lip reading. But do you know how I found out? Because I was literally wearing bright lipstick, and Anissa was like, this is hard for lip reading. And so sometimes, especially for those of us who don't have access to or are part of certain communities or certain identities, we're not going to know until we actually make a mistake. And so the issue in terms of recovering is that the recovery be part of your creating an inclusive best practice from your best mistake. Laura Liswood, I believe is a white lesbian, has a book called The Loudest Duck. Have any of you come across it? In that book, The Loudest Duck, she talks about this room where there's an elephant and there's a mouse. And here's the deal. The mouse knows everything about the elephant. Knows when the elephant goes to sleep, when the elephant goes to the bathroom, that's pretty important. When the elephant is eating, prancing about. Why? Because the mouse's survival depends on knowing everything about the elephant. You know what? That elephant doesn't even know that there's a mouse in that room. And so here's my other super tweetable quotation, and this one is actually from me. Yay. For us marginalized folks, we need to actually amplify ourselves because there's so many white canon, right? So much white canon. Broca would say I haven't assimilated enough, and you know what? I'm queer, Latinx, and proudly not assimilated, right? So this is what I'm going to share with you. Privilege can be fluid. I'll say it again. Privilege can be fluid. So sometimes we're going to be the mouse in some rooms, and sometimes we're going to be an elephant in some other rooms. Sometimes we're going to be a mouse in some rooms, and sometimes we're going to be an elephant in some rooms. I've shared with you that I'm queer, so I'm a mouse when it comes to orientation. I've shared with you that I'm a woman, so I'm a mouse when it comes to just power dynamics in the gender world. I've shared with you that I'm Latinx, so I'm a mouse when it comes to race. I've also shared with you that I'm cis, so I'm an elephant. I've also shared with you that I'm hearing, so I'm an elephant there too. So here's the thing that often I grapple with, which is, especially for those of us who have experience as a mouse, why is it so hard for us to, that experience that we have as a mouse, to bring it with us in those rooms where we're the elephant? I mentioned earlier that we launched our latest angel investing bootcamp, and one of my favorite things to talk about is that oftentimes white women are the white men of women's networks. And let me tell you, I get tons of, some of you have been doing this, I get tons of claps when I say that, particularly from the people of color in the room. And there's a little bit of defensiveness, for a lot of white women and femmes. And so here's the deal. When we feel defensive, when people are talking about broad strokes, and when we talk about power, and when we talk about who has power, it's not personal, right? And if someone feels that it's personal, then maybe there's a reason why they feel that defensive, right? So I think that it's a point and a moment to think about it and to kind of course correct. Another article that I'd love for you to check out is by Sarah Brzaitis, PhD. I might kind of not get the title right, so please tweet me so I can send you the link. It's White Women Positioned to Disrupt or Maintain the Status Quo. And so I think these are really great examples on how we can really think about a lot of us who might have both the identity of mouse and elephant, and how we can really learn from when we're the mouse to be better elephants and then actually create more inclusive spaces. What are some of your self-care tips to cope with potential burnout while working towards more inclusion? How do you balance helping others and yourself? I love TV. I love TV. And I particularly love TV that I have slightly aged out from. Yes. You know, like CW, Freeform. And I've been thinking a lot about why I love that sort of TV. And a big part of it is because they often have characters that from day one, in terms of the characters and how diverse and inclusive each character is, they're kind of like the main characters versus a lot of TV that is, you know, for older audiences and potentially predominantly white audiences. Yes, they have that gay character, but it's for that 2-episode arc. You know, yes, finally we have 2 Black people on the show, but then something happens to them. And my sense is because since they are targeting and focusing on the younger demographic who already get a lot of this stuff because they, you know, were born at a time that there was just more access to these conversations, right? That's why the shows are that way. And so the first one that I'm thinking about is The Fosters. How many of you are familiar with The Fosters? Yes, and I have to, you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that one of the co-producers is Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo. And for those of you who might not know, I believe that one of Jennifer Lopez's aunts is gay. And so this was one of the ways that she wanted to honor her aunt by creating content to create a more inclusive community. And so with that show, you know, there were an interracial lesbian couple talking about foster care, talking about trans rights, talking about, what was the other one? Like, hashtag, what is it? Like, they were talking about like deportation. You know, these are serious, heavy topics. And then Refinery 29 interviewed me for an article, and I'm sharing this, and like the reporter was like, but wouldn't that make you exhausted? Like you're still watching the stuff that you're doing day to day. And I'm like, it inspires me because it reminds me that others are also doing it. It inspires me because I'm here, you know, relaxing, doing some self-care, and these issues are still being discussed. And so yes, TV is one of them. Let's find out what else. What does this look like in the classroom? Often when the school building may not make it a priority or support efforts. The Slido, how many of you do you think that might be something that you could be including in your classroom, right? And thank you for that one, because I have another example of another inclusive best practice. So I was told that there's some like tabletops or like some high tables at certain places near the exit where there's this magazine that I brought. Yes, that's me. I think it's important for 2 reasons. The theme of the issue is the future of finance, and it's not a white guy. So simple things such as like, what sort of terms are you using next to what sort of visuals? And remember, like if you have visuals, make sure that you also include captioning for those who might be blind and hard of seeing. The article, the original title of the article was going to be Women and Money Equal Power. Several of our portfolio company founders are non-binary. And I pushed back because these are about 35 or 50 plus founders. And I pushed back because we actually literally have a picture of one of our non-binary founders here. So just imagine what that would have meant if you had women plus money equals power for that non-binary founder here. Literally, we would be erasing them due to the language used. I managed to get them to like correct the title, so it actually now says women and femmes and money equal power. So the title is now accurate. They also made sure to not scare their mostly cis audience, so maybe it's a win for both of us, right? But why do I bring this up for that question about the classroom? Because language is so important in the classroom. There's so many signs. What are you doing with the signs? What are you doing with the language that you're using? As a multilingual person, Spanish, Italian, French, a lot of these Romance languages are so gendered, and so the reason that we have, forgot to show off in case, or maybe hopefully you'll tell me that I did because I forgot. Like, the reason we have Latinx is because we're literally breaking grammar law. We're rebels, but because we need to be rebels. How many times have you said, I'll give you an example, mothers and fathers, when English actually has a more inclusive word? Parents. How many times have you said brothers and sisters when English has actually a more gender inclusive word? Siblings. How many times have you said, like, trust me, there are a lot, except for like nieces and nephews. Like, I've thought about this a long time. Although I've been told that on Twitter there's like a nephews, like there's like a new word that has come up. So like, and that's exactly it. How can we create, if it isn't already there, how can we create new words or new systems or new processes to, and so I'd say those are things to think about. The other one that I'll give you is our Pitch Summit process. The only way to apply to potentially be considered for funding from our members, for any entrepreneur who's seeking funding, is they have to do this. They have to do the same exact process, which is go and apply. We have a short online application, and the reason for this is because I'll share with you. I was at another conference a while back, and there was a panel, and it was men of color VCs, and there was an entrepreneur in the audience who asked them, "What's the best way to reach you?" And each of them said, "A warm intro is the best." And I'm so proud of this entrepreneur because she then said, "How does that make you any different from all the white guy VCs out there then?" And so it was almost like there was like this like aha moment for each of them. And so the reason I bring this up is because by creating systems that are the same for any and each person. So if you're an ed tech entrepreneur right here, or if there's someone following this on Slido somehow in another room, or they're following the live tweeting, or they just met a member in another conference, or they know an entrepreneur, a Pipeline Angels portfolio company elsewhere, they each have to apply the same way. And so when you think about classrooms, what sort of policies are you enacting, and are you being consistent across the board? Because those exceptions are a huge reason of why we don't have a meritocracy. Because not everyone, while some people are waiting, for the door to open, there are others who have access to that back door. And so yes, how about we create like a bigger, more well-known, more transparent, more accessible door in the first place, versus having like these little ways that people kind of want to go around the system. Where is the line? And so in between, this person might not want me to answer this. Where is the line between accepting and being inclusive and changing too many aspects of who you are to please others and trying to be inclusive? So the first part that I'd say is being inclusive is not about changing yourself per se, unless you're a racist. Did you get what I just did? Being inclusive is changing the environments and the systems so that more people are brought in. And to me, we had like a pitch summit a while back in Charlotte, and when we talk about access and accessibility, especially for those of us who are abled, how many times have you ever and there was a tragedy actually that happened recently in the New York City subway system. Does anyone remember what happened with that? Someone unfortunately, lost their life because they were trying. I think it was like they were trying to do hold a baby carrier, and so they fell, and it was such a tragedy. And a lot of disabled people and disability activists, because reminder, there's a Venn diagram, there's a little bit of overlap, but not everyone who's disabled is a disability activist, because why should they, right? And they're saying it's interesting that a lot of the conversation has not focused on the analogies and the parallels of creating a more accessible subway that could have prevented this, because then there would have been an elevator. There would have been other ways that it would not have been going through that, through that staircase, or using the escalator. So that, to me, like, if we talk about access and accessibility when we're abled, like those big, you're like the escalator, oh, of course, it's not working, of course, this is actually super hard. But like what happened at this Charlotte Pitch Summit was that I was going in and we went, Annie Delaney, Annie Segarra, does that name ring a bell? If you don't follow Annie, pronouns she, her, they, them. Annie is queer, Latinx, disabled, and also a creator and activist. Annie's behind these shirts, so if you want, just remind me and I'll send you a link to the shirt to support them. I think it was in one of the tweets that I had been reading from Annie that made me aware of what was happening at that building, which was there was this slight step between a hallway and a kitchen. Just slight, this much. Doesn't take much. But what was the design rationale for that? So for someone who's abled, that's nothing. Like, we wouldn't even think twice, like that's easy. But for someone who might be in a wheelchair, that slight step made that kitchen not accessible, especially if there wasn't like a ramp, thank you. And why I'm thinking about that example with respect to that question is because that's exactly what inclusion means. It's like making sure that the systems are more accessible. Okay, let me find out. How do you recover when you are the one constantly having to do the calling out or calling in and are automatically tokenized, expected to give feedback and call out mistakes? Oh my gosh, I did this yesterday and it was amazing. It's setting boundaries. There was a white member who joined us, and we were having a conversation, and there was a lot of pushback about how can we find, like, this is not the right way to do this. How can we find a way that doesn't oppress white people? To like really make inclusion happen. And I was so impressed with myself. I was like, first of all, and this is so cool, we have a code of conduct, and if you haven't, created a code of conduct for any organizations that you're part of, or like you are like literally this organization needs a code of conduct stat, the Geek, I think it's called like Geek Feminism Wiki, has created an open source code of conduct, so check them out. And my favorite part of that code of conduct is that it has a part where it clearly stipulates that we will prioritize the safety of marginalized people over anyone else. And under it, it discusses how we will not be accepting or tolerating reverse isms. People complaining about someone else calling out racism, someone else calling out homophobia, someone else calling out Islamophobia. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because a big part of the conversation is creating that boundary that, we're not going to accept like someone saying that reverse racism in terms of like white people can be, subjects of racism as well, right? And then being comfortable saying that's my boundary. If that's a conversation you're gonna have, this is the key to not burn out, is finding those allies, finding those people who want to have that conversation. And there was this other white woman in the room who said, you know what, I'll have that talk. You know what, I'll have that conversation. And somehow I was able to then protect myself, because calling out and calling in, it takes a lot. That's why that conversation, it burns you out. And so it's also being comfortable saying, and Nicole Cuellar, who's Nicolenka on Twitter, is another Pipeline Angels member, Black and Latinx, from the video. She tweeted a while back that sometimes, we don't have to seize each learning moment. And so for those of us from marginalized experience, marginalized identities, we don't have to seize each learning moment, especially if we need to recharge. At the same time, with this example, that white woman seized that learning moment because she realized that she could add value by calling in that other white woman. And I'm happy to share that some of that calling in was that the person found out about a book called White Fragility, and was like, oh my gosh, you were right, Natalia. And it was, I don't know, hopefully it'll be, it takes time and it takes progress. So wait a second, when it comes to race. Oh, so that's great. So I chatted about the person who's offended. That was a great moment because it was someone who was open to getting it. There are gonna be some people who are gonna be offended and are not gonna get it. What I'm gonna share with you is don't waste your time. And I think it's important for each of us to give ourselves permission to not waste our times. What are some of the most beneficial ways for white women and men to show that they are allies and supporters of underrepresented groups? Shut up. I'm just doing that because I feel like that's going to be the recap that will go viral. Help me out, please. Brittany Braithwaite has an amazing quotation, which is, I didn't have to find my voice. I had to find who was silencing me. I didn't have to find my voice. I had to find out who was silencing me. And oftentimes, it just so happens we live in a world where there's white supremacy, white privilege, anti-blackness, and so many other of the bigotries that we haven't talked about yet, anti-Semitism. And so a lot of the people doing the talking, a way that they can be allies and supporters is actually by stepping back and listening. And it can be hard. It can be hard. However, that is a really great way to be an ally. So I have 20 seconds, and I just want to thank you for, number one, oftentimes one of the issues with creating more inclusive practices and systems and processes is that sometimes they're new, and sometimes you don't know if everyone's going to adopt them. And there might have been some people here in the room, and I want to acknowledge this because there was another question about what if there's no computer? Well, what if some of you didn't have a phone, or you ran out of battery, so you actually weren't able to participate, right? These are things we have to think about, and so it's a little bit of how can we continue to make an inclusive practice even better the next time. And so I offer you nakis, if you want to, my DMs are open. If you want to continue a conversation, I don't remember if there's time for me to stick around. If there is, I'm happy to continue the conversation one-on-one. And what I hope you take from today is that if you want to be inclusive, be explicit. And I have another one in case you want another thing to tweet, which is when the most marginalized are leading, that's when inclusion happens. Thank you.